All right, so we'll just wait a few more moments. Right now, there's only one other person here. And right now, I'm just waiting for a model to converge while I'm waiting for other people to show up. Tends to take a little bit of time sometimes. All right, let's go ahead and stop this. This model's going to take forever to converge. And let's go to the actual test. Hello? All right, I'm going to wait a few more moments for someone else to show up. It's a little bit frustrating if only one person shows up. Like I said, I'm going to wait. Wait a couple more. Okay, well, it is 2:52 now. I got a long day ahead of me, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. All right, so which of the following is not a component of GDP? All right, so GDP is equal to C plus I plus G plus net exports. That is the definition of GDP. So the correct answer there is going to be A, income. Income is not included in GDP because GDP is effectively the output, and your output does not include your actual income. Now, it is true that aggregate expenditures or aggregate income is going to be equal to GDP, but that's still not GDP. GDP is C plus I plus G plus net exports. Question number 2, what does GDP not measure? All right, so GDP does not measure intermediate goods. All right, intermediate goods are the goods used to produce goods, and if we included intermediate goods, well, that means we would effectively be double counting the inputs to GDP. GDP is not going to measure black market production. So, someone buys a little bit of weed from their roommate. That's not going to show up in GDP unless the drug dealer reports that to the IRS, which, interestingly enough, you can actually report illegal income, and the IRS isn't supposed to tell on you, but they almost certainly will. I actually read up on that because just for fun, for whatever reason, but they say they're not supposed to, but there almost surely is chatter in between the departments. All right, finally, GDP does not measure household production. All right, so if I spent the day watching children and scrubbing walls because a kid got hold of a crayon that was in a couch, and that effort would not be captured by GDP. Interestingly enough, though, if our sitter had done the work, that would have been captured by GDP because we hired her. But general household production doesn't count towards GDP. In fact, you see some people complaining about GDP being a bit of a sexist measure of production because women are predominantly household workers, although that's starting to become less the case. So people complain about that, they're aware of it, and household production is not included. So the correct answer there would be D, none of the above. Question number 3, opportunity cost. This is just a straight up definition. The benefit you might have gained from choosing your next best alternative. It's not the cost of good. It's not the benefit you might have gotten from all of your other options. It is the benefit you might have gained from your next best. It's what else you could have done. It's just a definition. All right, consider the market for beef. If the price of hay decreases, an input for the production of beef, and the price of chicken increases, a substitute for beef, we would expect what? All right, so let's go ahead and unpack this a little bit because this is a tricky question because it's a double shift. All right, so let's move that over there and bring up a table. So I'm just going to bring up an Excel spreadsheet from another class. And what I'm going to do is we're going to figure out, all right, what are the pressures here? All right, so the first step is to figure out what curves are shifting. Consider the market for beef. If the price of grass hay decreases, an input for the production of beef, and the price of chicken increases, a substitute for beef, we would. So let's see if we can figure this out. So the supply curve is going to shift because the input in production. And how is it going to shift? Decreases. So supply is going to shift down. Things are getting cheaper. Are cheaper to produce. What this means in practical terms is that there is a downward pressure in price and an increase, upward pressure on quantity. All right, now let's look at the demand curve. Our demand curve is going to shift up. And the reason the demand curve is going to shift up is because people that were once purchasing chicken are no longer purchasing chicken. They're purchasing beef. All right, so that's going to put upward pressure on price and upward pressure on quantity. So we can put increase, increase, increase. All right, so we know, therefore, that quantity is going to increase, but price is going to be a question mark because we have these two opposing forces, and we don't know which one's going to dominate. So let's see if this matches up with any of our answers. Expect the equilibrium price and quantity to decrease. Nope, that's not it. Expect the equilibrium price and quantity to increase. Nope, that's not there. Expect the equilibrium price to fall and the equilibrium quantity to increase. Nope, that's not it. The correct answer there is going to be none of the above. There we go. All right, so let's now move on to question 5. I'm going to blow this back up. Use the table below to answer the following questions. What is the value added by the smelter? All right, so the smelter, its cost of materials is 50. He sells it for 100. So he adds $50 worth of value. Correct answer there is going to be that B. Next question. If we use the value of sales of intermediate goods, by how much would GDP be overstated by? All right, well, first all of we have to do is add up all of the value of sales for the intermediate goods, and if my math is correct, we would get 600. But the good actually sold to the final user for 250, because that goes from the vendor. So we just take 600 and subtract from it 250, and that gives us 350. So we would overstate GDP by quite a bit, 350 in this case. This is a good question. I really like this one. If we incorrectly counted intermediate goods, how much would GDP decrease if the miner and smelter merged? All right, so to answer that, let's first realize that if we incorrectly counted intermediate goods, the total value of sales, the total GDP in this case, would be 600. So now what we want to do is we want to merge the miner and the smelter. So really all we have to do is just imagine that this 0 right here moves down to the smelter's cost of materials, and this miner just disappears. So it goes from 0 to 100. So then we just add up 100 plus 200 plus 250, and if my math is correct, that gives us 550. And so because the miner and smelter merged, I'm going to zoom in just a little bit more. There we go. Because the miner and smelter merged, they now have the GDP incorrectly measured has decreased by $50, which is crazy because all you did was reorganize the market. That's one of the reasons why we don't we don't add up all the value of the sales. We don't double count intermediate goods. We only count final goods and services. All right, so these are the fun questions, and they require a little bit of logical thinking. Number 1. Suppose the number of hours worked by workers in Wakanda decreases, but the amount of goods produced stays the same. This would cause real GDP to do what? This is it's kind of a fun little question. Because your instinct there is to say it's decreasing because they're not working. But in reality, it's going to stay the same. It's going to stay the same because they're still producing the same amount of goods. So their production hasn't changed. They're just working less. So maybe they had like some piece of capital equipment came in and people didn't have to work as many hours, but they can still produce the same amount of goods. That's completely plausible. What this question is getting at is one of the weaknesses of GDP as a measure of welfare. I mean, it's really hard to argue that in this example that the people in Wakanda aren't better off. They're better off because, well, they have the same amount of stuff, but they're not working as hard. So they're better off, obviously. So the correct answer there is C, stay the same. Question number 9. If real GDP is increasing, then real per capita GDP is. Well, trick is we actually don't know in this case. Not enough information to tell. Because if real GDP is going up by 1%, but the population has tripled, well, that means everybody is going to be on average worse off. Likewise, if real GDP doubles and the population stays the same, well then then people are obviously better off. So when we talk about per capita terms, you have to take into account that there are two variables changing it. There's two variables changing. One, the population is going to be changing over time, and 2, GDP is going to be changing over time. And if GDP is increasing, that doesn't necessarily mean that people are on average better off. It could just mean that you have, it could mean that, you double the number of people working and GDP, or double the number of people in the country, and GDP increases by 1%. Well, on average, people are going to be much worse off. And so, just keep that in mind. All right. On the other hand, you could have GDP fall by 1%, but if the population is falling by 2%, well, that means that on average, people are more productive or enjoying more stuff. So, it's what you have to do is take into consideration scales. And so if one effect is dominating the other, well, that means we can say something. If we don't have all that information, that means we can't really say anything for certain when we're talking about when we're talking about things in per capita terms. Question number 10. If real GDP is increasing and the population is falling, then per capita real GDP, that's going to be increasing. So people are getting richer, the country is getting more productive, producing more stuff, and the population is falling. Well, that means that fraction is going to be getting bigger. So that means real GDP per capita is going to be increasing. In a typical business cycle, what comes directly after the trough? All right, so the trough is as bad as it's going to get. And so once you get to that point, well, it can only go uphill. So that would be the upturn. Question number 12. All right, this is one of those that I'm going to return to my Excel spreadsheet to help you answer. We're going to do 12 and 13. Yeah, 12 and 13 on the Excel spreadsheet. All right, so I'm just going to copy this, open up my old spreadsheet. All right, so what's going to be the size of our labor force? All right, so this one's tricky. Our labor force is made up of full-time workers. It's going to be this cell. And people searching for work. It's going to be this cell. Now, there's other people that we're not going to include in our labor force. Those are going to be our students. They're not in the labor force. They're not searching for work. Our inmates. No, inmates are not considered in the workforce. Discouraged or disgruntled workers, they are not in the workforce because you need to remember these workers, the disgruntled workers, let's just put a little big red there. These are the workers who exit the labor force, meaning that they are no longer searching for work, but they would be if the labor market conditions improved a little bit. But they're not there. And remember, for you to be considered unemployed and therefore in the labor force, you have to be actively searching for work and be willing and able to work. And so because these people aren't searching for work, they're not in the labor force. And then finally, our elderly folks. They are not in the labor force. So the correct answer here is our labor force is equal to 100 plus 375. 475 folks are in the labor force. So the correct answer there is D, none of the above. All right, let's figure out our unemployment rate. Well, all we have to do there is take our labor force, and then in the numerator, we're going to take our people for searching for work, and we're going to divide it by 475, and that gives us about 21%. Now, our employment rate would be 1 minus that. Oh. Or about 79%. All right. Which group would be most likely to enter the workforce if labor market conditions improved? Correct answer there is none of the above. Those would be the disgruntled workers. This is one of those questions that in retrospect I don't 100% like. If you can email me, I'm not going to make you email me. I don't like this question 100% because, well, yeah, I don't like this question 100% in retrospect. We'll give you 5 points. extra for that one. That one's a confusing one. I mean, I think the answer is clearly none of the above because the disgruntled, discouraged workers would clearly re-enter the workforce because it's implied that by the table that they were in the workforce, but now they're not because they took their ball and went home. But you could very easily make the argument that students might re-enter the workforce if labor market conditions improved, but I mean that's a real stretch, and it's a stretch because it's sort of implying that the students went to school only because labor market conditions were really bad, and I suppose that happens from time to time. But you really have to squint hard for that answer to make sense. But that said, it was, in retrospect, not the clearest question in the world from my part. So I'm going to increase the curve by, I'm going to give everybody 5 extra points on that one. Like 5 points to the 250. Like, so you know how your curve is 20 points right now? I'm going to increase it by 5 points. Don't overthink this. All right, let's blow this guy back up. All right, Bob works as a VCR repairman. In 1995, the DVD player was introduced and people stopped buying tapes and therefore no longer use their VCR. Because people are no longer using their VCRs, Bob loses his job. What type of unemployment best describes Bob's situation? This is a classic example of structural unemployment. What I mean by structural unemployment is that Bob's services are no longer wanted by the labor market. This one's a tough one. It means that Bob's going to have to go through some re-education process, which is going to be painful and costly, and develop a skill that's going to be wanted by the labor market. So it's structural unemployment. Question number 16. Demand-side policies are generally used to. They are used to smooth the business cycle and... Oh man, I made a mistake on this one. This right here, it's not to... This is none of the above. Oh, no, this is fine. This is fine. I didn't read the supply side. Oops, my bad. Got people's hopes up there for a second. Sorry, it's been a long day. Demand-side policies are generally used to smooth the business cycle, while supply-side policies are generally used to encourage economic growth. All right, so you want to have hands-off approaches and encourage savings and investment. That would be a supply-side policy. And you want to, stimulate or destimulate aggregate demand. Well, that's going to smooth out the business cycle. So the correct answer there is, in fact, B. Sorry for getting your hopes up. Inflation will tend to be overstated because, as prices change, people's buying habits change. So that means the CPI isn't going to be a great measure of inflation. That's why A could be an answer. Goods from different time periods tend to be different quality and usually improve. That's also true. And if the price of a good increases, people will sometimes start buying the same good from a discount store that sells the same good at a lower price. That is absolutely true. So the correct answer there is D, all of the above. Why do I have a UPS truck? All right, 17 is done. 18, the table below provides you the basket of goods purchased by the average consumer in 2010, as well as the price of each of these goods in 2010 and 2015. Use this table to answer the following question. How much does a basket of goods cost in 2010 and 2015? All right, let's go ahead and calculate this real quick. Again, we're going to run over to our trusty spreadsheet. All right, so we're buying 5 cookies, 2 t-shirts, 1 gallon of milk, 1 pair of pants, and 2 movie tickets. All right, so let's find our expenditures in 2010 and our expenditures in 2015. And let me go ahead and fix that. There we go. So it's just going to be the price in 2010 times the amount of goods that we're buying. So let's just go ahead and fix that reference cell so we can just drag everything. So we spent $5 on cookies, $12 on t-shirts, $2 on milk, $10 on pants, and $2 in movie tickets. Let's sum up these expenditures. And we can do the same thing for 2015. Oh, that was dumb. And then find the sum. So it's going to be $65 in 2015 and $39 in 2010. All right, so now we can use this to figure out our inflation rate. All we have to do is do 65 divided by 39. And that gives us 1.66, meaning that we have about 66.666666% inflation. So the correct answer there is A. All right. Suppose nominal GDP was $16 million in 2015, and that is redundant. I shouldn't have put that there. I should just put 16. That's a typo. All right. Whoops. 16 million. Ugh, I hate it when I do that. In 2015, using the CPI that can be created from the table above, convert the nominal GDP figure into a real figure that can be compared to 2010. All right. So all we have to do is take this 16 million. And then what we want to do is we want to divide that by our deflator, which is 1.66. And then we get 9.6 million. And so let's just go ahead and add in those commas so that we can see that I am not making things up. And there we go. Now that shouldn't be red. 9.6 million is the correct answer there. Question number 21. This is a good question. I like it because it requires you to have a have some intuition about some of the drawbacks of CPIs. That is, they are very dependent upon the balance in the index. And I was talking about this with a friend the other day in a different context about how if you have one element of a set that makes up a disproportionate amount of it, that means any index based on that set is going to be heavily influenced by its by its strongest member. So we were talking about this in the context of Google search data. And so right now what we're looking at is the effect of searches for purchasing masks in the past and how they end up affecting COVID-19 fatalities. And so, we're looking at several different search terms and, we're trying to, get a good measure on it. But basically what we're finding is that, the entire index that we're creating is dominated by one search term, and just adding on more stuff to it, although it may satisfy a referee, people reading the paper, at the end of the day, it's all this one variable. And so we're seeing the same thing here, but not to the same extent with the CPI. And what I mean here is that a large chunk of our expenditures are going to be driven by our cookies. And, to see this, let's return now to our CPI. Let's increase everything by $1. Given this inflation would be even higher, and cookie expenditures would be the largest source of that change. And that's going to be absolutely true. Let me show you why. So we are going to increase the price of cookies by 3, and we can look to see what happened. So let's just actually copy this. So now our prices increased to 3, to 13, to 2, 11, and also 11. It just increased by $1. So we can look at here and compare the updated, so dollar increase, to the original. And what we see here is that our cookies expenditure, they went from 10 to 15, even though the price of cookies only increased by an additional $1. And what's happening here is that we bought a bunch of cookies. So cookies make up a large or a large portion of our CPI, and so even a small price change is going to lead to a large increase in the expenditures. So we can compare this to the other ones. All right, so we only bought 2 t-shirts, and it was just $1 increase, and so that led to just a $2 increase in our expenditures. 1 gallon of milk, that's just $1. Then 10 to 11, again, that's just $1. And so 20 to 22, that's $2. So again, the largest percentage increase is going to go from this 10 to 15. So cookies would actually be the main driver of inflation here, even though everything increased by $1. All right, economics is the study of how human beings coordinate their wants and desires given the decision-making mechanisms, social customs, political realities of the society. More generally, this is thought as the study of scarcity. This is a gimme question. That is economics. Which of the following would likely result in an increase in the demand for beef? Well, that is going to be an increase in income. That would shift that demand curve up. Remember what we're talking about when we say increase in the demand. We're saying a movement of the demand curve, not a movement along the demand curve, a movement of the demand curve. Which of the following would likely result in an increase in the quantity of beef demanded? All right, so we're talking about changes in quantity demanded. That is a movement along the demand curve, meaning that our demand curve is staying fixed. And so the law of demand, that's when we're applying the law of demand. And so that's going to be a decrease in the price of beef. So as the price of a good falls, the quantity demanded of that good increases. All right. Suppose the GDP deflator or price index was 100 in 2018 and 1.2 in 2020. If nominal GDP was 10,000 in 2018 and 1,200 in 2020, in this scenario, real GDP grew by X percent. Then, in this scenario, real GDP grew by X percent. All right, let's go ahead and just chart this out. I'm going to make a new page here. All right, so what we want to have is 2020 and 2018. That's going to be the year. And we're going to have nominal GDP. And we'll do 10,000 and 12,000. And our GDP deflator, so our measure of inflation, is 100. And then, oh no! Alright, this is a legitimate mess up right here. This should be 120. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and complete this, but I'm going to go through and scrap this question. So we're gonna give you a few extra points there too. Question number 25. So the price index was 100, then this should be 120. This is why I can't stand how there's no consistency in reporting how these stupid indexes work. They always want to multiply it by 100 or not multiply it 100. It makes everything so bloody confusing. And so you end up with dumb mistakes like this every once in a while. Alright, so this is the index. And then all we have to do, so this would be actually 1, and this would be 1.2. And so our real GDP would be that divided by that. And then we can do the same thing for our real GDP. In 2020, we just divide it by the price index, and then we get 1,000, or 10,000 technically, and we can see that these two numbers are the same, so real GDP did not grow. It's actually the same, so it'd be a 0% increase. Question number 25, like I said, has a very unfortunate typo in it. There should either be a 0.0 or a decimal point here, or this should just be 120. It's just a typo on my part. So I'm gonna give a few extra points there too. All right, so that closes out this test review. Are there any questions? Sorry if I'm speaking loud. I think I'm a little closer to the microphone than usual. No questions? All right, well, I'm going to be on a different computer fixing your grades so that I can just basically making up for that question number 25 error. So I'm basically going to give everybody 10 extra points on the curve. So anyway, that's it. I'll be here for a few more moments. Send a message or email me if you have a question, and I can answer it in real time, no problem. Okay, still here, but bye. Okay. I don't see any questions, so I'm gonna post this this video, and I hope you guys have a good afternoon. I'll talk to you later. Bye.